Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have a terrific day ahead of you. In today's video, a very different everything you need. One that starts off with not the staple piece, captaincy, by looking into all the different options, but rather starts off by looking at whether we should be wildcarding. And then from there, later in the video, a wildcard draft with Salah, without Salah, and for both, a huge set of transfer plans. So there's a lot of depth to the wildcard in this video. Also, with another chip, should we be triple captaining? And then a very important topic, and one which is crucial to get right because it will undoubtedly have a huge effect on your season. Arsenal, right? Raya, Calafiori, Gabriel, Saliba, Saka, Eze, Gyökeres. Which are the best three? Do you even need three? And then Phil Foden and some of the other guys. So a lot of interesting and important topics coming up. If at any point you enjoyed the video, a like, a hype, a subscribe, all would be greatly appreciated. I hope you have a terrific day, like I said, and enjoy the video. Should you be wildcarding this week? Now, whenever a question like this comes up, the first thing one must say is that it's squad dependent, right? And of course it is. It has to be. However, to take a more general perspective, do I think you should be wildcarding this week? Well, a lot of the squads I've seen for Game Week 6, particularly the starting 11s, are actually very strong. They already consist of Bournemouth assets, including Semenyo, who are away to Leeds. They already have a decent route into Erling Haaland and Tijani Reinders and Phil Foden for Burnley at home. There's not too many City defenders flying around on wildcards either, so that doesn't look like the biggest deal. There's a lot of João Pedros for Brighton at home, and a Brighton who haven't been quite as good this season. And in some cases, there's some Forest assets, which you would like for Sunderland at home. And in some cases, there's not Arsenal, there's not Newcastle, both of whom have a challenging fixture this week against each other, and so on, right? And maybe, for example, you don't have a Liverpool asset as well, and you're taking them out this week when they have Palace away. But to be honest, Chelsea away in Game Week 7 and the fixtures after, I think you could actually capitalise on. So with that being said, and maybe you still want to keep Aston Villa assets for Game Week 6. I imagine not, but maybe you do. So with that being said, and the squad strength in general being quite good, I do think there's something to be said about delaying it, right? Whether that be in Game Week 7 to maybe have a better look at Manchester United, have a look at them against the side who are actually going to play with 11 men as opposed to 10. Have a look at Liverpool following Salah's improved performance against Everton, where the right-hand side dynamics were better. Because if that translates into another game and they do well against Palace, all of a sudden you might want the double up of Salah and Haaland. Because I think stylistically, the fixtures coming up for Salah, aside from Palace, are actually quite good. So that's something you could consider. And you won't have to enter Arsenal/Newcastle a little bit early. And those who have gone wildcard 6, you'll essentially have 1 week's information over them, allowing you just to adjust the little mistakes that maybe some people make that aren't so obvious at the moment. So I don't think it's a great strategy. I don't think it's a bad strategy. I think it's somewhere in the middle, and not just to say it's squad dependent. However, if I had to choose, given the strength of squad, I would probably try to delay it by 1/2 so you can have the IB, or if not, longer than that. In terms of playing it, I mean, it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. I get it. I mean, it will save them taking hits for Haaland. They would have saved some team value, will still continue to save some team value. Your defense is probably not where you want it to be, considering how prominent DEFCON has been in the discussion recently, right? So going and getting those defenders, and then just stacking up your team so you can have depth and free transfers down the line. That I all completely understand. Still, my preference would be not to play it. I think whether it be 7 or 8 or even 13, which we'll come on to at some point, I think there's more utility to be gained from that. But nonetheless, I still think it's decent. Not my preference, though. Moving on to the next chip. Should you be triple captaining? And I would be more inclined to say yes to this as opposed to the wildcard, actually, because I really do think that the squads are strong enough in 6, and in 7 and 8, it could be a huge advantage to play, if not 13. However, with that being said, ideally, I wouldn't, and I shall explain why. We'll come on to the positives for doing so this week in a little bit. Ideally, you'd never want to play it on a forward. Ideally, you'd want a midfielder in the game who has the same likelihood of goals and assists in any given game across the first 19 to be able to match Haaland in Game Week 6, where a lot of people are playing it, so that you can capitalize on that extra upside through the extra point for the goal, through the extra point for the clean sheet, and of course, if you're Bruno Fernandes, potentially DEFCON as well. And if all those things were to come in, which when you think about the game you're looking to target, right, may not be the most unlikely thing. Maybe you'd get 2 out of the 4. Or maybe 3 out of the 4 in Bruno Fernandes' case. Then all of a sudden, it looks a lot better, right? you are gaining a little bit. Yeah, fine, it's not the biggest gain in the world, but where it's available to yourself, you probably want to take it. Now, the big challenge here is there for yourself to find a point where the mid's likelihood, Salah, Palmer, Saka, Bruno, etc., matches Erling Haaland's this week. But for me, when there's so long to go, I'm willing to have some faith that at some point there becomes a matchup, for example, for Salah. I'm really looking at Salah / Bruno in particular. Bruno for the added bonus of DEFCON, and Salah because he's the best attacker, or at least the best right winger in the league. I'm looking at that, right? And these two in particular, because Cole Palmer doesn't look like he's going to be fit for a while, and Saka, not quite the same ruthlessness in being able to get that massive haul that I think Salah and Bruno have shown in the past. So I'm really looking at those two. And my hope is that in the 13 weeks that are to be thereafter, there will be an opportunity for Salah or Bruno to exploit a matchup heavily, and they'd actually have the same likelihood of output that Erling Haaland does now. Realistically, you're looking at 2 goals for Haaland, and if you got that, it'd be a success for Haaland, right? Obviously, if you're triple captaining him, you really want him to get to 3, but Burnley's 5-4-1 has actually been pretty decent. They've done well against Liverpool. They've done well against Forest. Honestly, they could have won that game with some of the chances they had a little bit earlier on. Ugochukwu will be back for that. They'll be well rested. City will be fairly well rested as well, but still a little bit more fatigued considering the Champions League games before. So, whilst it's still a very good fixture, I don't think it's a slam dunk in the same way we may have viewed Southampton last season. So yeah, for me, ideally, I wouldn't want to be playing it because I want to play it in the mid down the line for higher upside. But if you were to go here this week with Haaland's form, with the quality of that City attack at the moment, I think it makes a lot of sense. Not my personal preference. Prefer to go down the line, have a little faith. And even so, even if it's Liverpool against the Big Six side, I know that Salah still got that in the locker, right? But again, personal preference. Now, you will notice, if you looked at the chapters for the videos already, that the wildcard drafts and the transfer plans for them are at the end. And the reason for that is there's so many individual players to discuss. I will discuss those on the wildcard. But some of the people have been omitted, and I think it was relevant to give them the airtime and to discuss why they were omitted and my thoughts on them. Because, like I said in the introduction, the Arsenal assets are going to hold such a key to your wildcard 6, 7, 8 success, right? Because most people are going to look to triple up. And as I show on screen, there are 7 very viable options to go for. So let's go through them. But before that, is a triple up necessary? And what you'll see in both my wildcard drafts, with Salah and without Salah, is that I don't start with the Arsenal triple up because I think the fixtures in the short term are actually glossed over by the FDR. Newcastle away, Arsenal don't have a great record there. They don't have a great record against Eddie Howe, or at least as of late. And that's a very hard place to go, right? I wouldn't say their current dynamics either are ones to really exploit that. You expect them to go man-to-man high press and then get back into that, I assume 4-5-1 for Arsenal deep block. And that is not something that I'm 100% sure that Arsenal break down repeatedly, mainly for the fact that they're 9 to Gyökeres at the moment, and he's far more suited to those transitional games as opposed to these ones. And I think they'll really try and be very, very physical with him, having seen his matchup against United and City as well. So I don't think that's great. West Ham in 7, I love it. No complaints, nothing whatsoever. Ideally, you'd want to triple up for that. Then after that, you've got Fulham away. Always a tough game. Always the big sides when they go to Fulham away have a challenge, and rightfully so, right? I mean, a good defensive coach with good defenders and a good system, fairly self-explanatory. And then after that, you have what I just discussed, but even harder in Palace away, who've had a really strong start to the season. And honestly, you know what? If that Eze goal doesn't get disallowed in game week 1, and they don't draw to Sunderland, which when they look back on it, they really shouldn't have done. They had chances. They'd be on 15 points, right? So yeah, they've been brilliant so far, as they have been for a long time now, right? The FA Cup champions. So those 4 fixtures, apart from West Ham at home in 7, I don't think you look at them and think, yeah, this is a slam dunk. It's also Fulham away, Arsenal, Palace away, Newcastle away, right? So that's not ideal. And I don't think it's necessary. For some of you, you really want to target that fixture in 7. Okay, I understand. Budget's a little bit tight though, and in certain structures, which we'll look at. And obviously, these guys are more expensive. So my personal opinion, so I don't think it's necessary. preferable, sure, but then you'd have to make some omissions elsewhere. I'll run through the options in a second, but before we get to all of those guys, something which I've seen very, very, very little of, and maybe rightfully so, is the Gyökeres and Saka double up together. And I thought I would just talk about that, because obviously Saka's expected minutes have improved following Noni Madueke's injury, and a lot of you looking to go Gyökeres anyway. So, is there a possibility, instead of going Gabriel Raya Gyökeres, you go Gabriel Saka Gyökeres? For me, as things stand, whilst I still think it's slightly overlooked and worth more consideration than it's being given, I personally wouldn't, just because Fulham away, Newcastle away, Palace away, I can envisage a scenario where Arsenal don't score too many goals. They could, and I'm completely accepting of that, given their quality, but they also couldn't, and that's a very, very, very realistic scenario. So I would probably just be going for one of them, which begs the question, which one? And I know Gyökeres is far, far, far more popular. But what you will see in my wildcard drafts is that he's actually in neither. And the reason for that is, if we assume Haaland and João Pedro to be locks, which I think is very fair, then that third spot, I think it could be taken by Jürgen Strand-Larsen to start with at least. Arsenal's fixtures don't really kick, apart from West Ham at home in 7, until game week 10, right? Yeah, until game week 10, where they face Burnley and Sunderland back to back, I think it to be. Unless there's one before that, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's that. But with Jürgen Strand-Larsen, honestly, I don't mind the Spurs fixture, then the Brighton fixture, then the 2 promoted sides. I think he is the one to actually go for early doors. He's obviously just scored midweek in the Cup, and then go into Gyökeres through a variety of plans, which I can show you later. Which would beg the question then, actually for 7, does it make more sense to have Saka as your attacker as opposed to Gyökeres? Because if you remember the Leeds game, it was Saka who looked a little bit better to start off with, and had he continued to play, maybe he would have been the one that hold and not Gyökeres, and maybe his injuries just taken a little bit of the limelight off him in that sense. So those are things to consider. Maybe you avoid Gyökeres as opposed to going for the double up with him and Saka. Something to consider, because I do really like Jürgen Strand-Larsen. We'll talk about him later. Lastly, is David Raya overrated as an option? Now, this is an interesting one, because when you look at those fixtures, especially Fulham away, Palace away, Newcastle away, I'd probably be more inclined to go double Arsenal defence as opposed to like having a triple up, one in midfield, one in the forward line, right? Is it better value to go for potentially a William Saliba or a Ricardo Calafiori? Should you be pretty adamant you want double Arsenal defence? I'm kind of just assuming Gabriel's in there. Maybe, because as every fantasy Premier League season has shown, the 5.5s or the 6s are never the best value for money. It's usually, well, it's always the 5 or the 4.5s. Even if they score a few less points, the value they represent is better. And should you have reinvested those funds elsewhere, you probably would have scored more. With Raya and Arsenal barely conceding any chances, that ceiling's never going to be too high, right? Whereas at least with Saliba, you've got a better chance at DEFCON. And with Calafiori, you've obviously got those attacking returns and some chance at DEFCON as well. Now, there is something to be said about Saliba's and Calafiori are a bit more expensive, and they would block other DEFCON defenders. And I understand that. But when you consider that, like, for example, Nick Pope has a much higher ceiling, or a ceiling that's much more attainable than Raya, for the fact that Newcastle concede more chances, and the fact that Saliba and Calafiori in their own right still have their roots to the upside in DEFCON and attacking returns to different degrees. And it's not like Saliba can't get an attacking return from a corner either. I mean, I look at Arsenal's set-piece routine against Manchester City, and I don't think it's one that favours Gabriel as much as it has in the past. And I think it's one which will see a wider spread of output for the defenders in the box. And for that reason, I personally, I think I was playing this. I would rather go Pope and Saliba / Calafiori as opposed to Raya and then another DEFCON defender. My personal preference, but I get the other side because you may want another DEFCON who's significantly cheaper. I just think in most structures where you're reinvesting that money, with the ones that I'm going to look at, it's actually not necessary. You can get Saliba in for now, at least. But I get the other side. Just some food for thought. In terms of the other options, I mean, Calafiori looks pretty much nailed. I don't think Miles Lewis-Skelly can replicate what Calafiori is doing currently to the extent, right, to the level that he's doing it at. At some point, does he get rested? Maybe, but Arteta's also shown in the past that like he's quite happy just to stick with the same team again, especially the backline again and again and again. So if you're willing for a benching here, and I won't even say here and there, but just once, then I think Calafiori could be a very cool option. Gabriel for me is a lock. I mean, whilst I said that the set pieces aren't as good for him, they're still better for him, I would say, or at least more directed towards him than the other guys. And you've got the DEFCON. He's slightly more aggressive in nature. Maybe that'll help. So I like that. And the only other guy who hasn't been spoken about is Eberechi. If I knew that if he wasn't to play in the middle, he would play on the left in a more fluid role, then I'd be far more interested. I think I'd want those security of expected minutes before I go there. And I'd also want him to show the output, and then I would go there, right? I want the proof first. But if that happens, I think being flexible within yourself and then just willing to go there, whether that be to take out another Arsenal asset, if you've already got double defense and Gyökeres, could certainly be an option. Phil Foden is not someone who finds himself in either one of the wildcard drafts. Yet, I think he could be a really underrated option for Burnley at home, Brentford away, as you see on screen with his brace from last season, and Everton at home. In terms of expected minutes, I think they're very good. In this system, there is no like-for-like profile that they have in the squad that can just come in and do what he does, mainly because Cherki's injured. And if you wanted to change the dynamics and have Marmoush functioning in that left channel, well, he's injured, so he can't do that anymore, right? So I'm with Foden's form and the fact he's actually quite useful off the ball as well. And he really understands what Pep's trying to do because he's been there for so long. I think his expected minutes are very, very good. Then you look at him, and he's always been someone who has goals in him, right? Phenomenally good ball striking. Yes, he's playing on that left side, so he doesn't have access to his trademark. Cut in a little bit, actually already in that central zone / half space. Cut in and absolutely rifle it into the net, right? He doesn't have that, but still from the left-hand side, his ball striking is good, and it's not like he can never pop up on the right. One thing I really like, and what I thought about specifically, was a game last season, right, away at Molineux, where I was watching Doku on the left-hand side, and I was like, if Phil Foden was in that left 8, and I think I tweeted about it, if Phil Foden was in that left 8, with the Gvardiol role at left back as well that he had in that game, I know it's probably going to be O'Reilly for the most part, but he's pretty decent in the final third as well. They would be so much better, and they would be so much more of a threat. Now he's got Doku there for him, and I think what this does is it's a wonderful pressure release because you can put that ball into Doku. He has so much 1v1 threat. He can take you up the pitch, and in his own threat, Doku, and what he has to attract for the opposition to nullify that, Foden can then find pockets of space to pick up, right? And Doku's very good at driving and then getting those cutbacks in, and maybe not even into the box, but maybe in a slightly smaller situation whereby he drives and then he gets a cutback into Foden, and then Foden can do something from there, right? And I think Foden also having the option of going into him and then City not having to circulate all the way back again because they can't break the block, because they can put it into Doku from there, and then things can happen. It's so good for him and City as well in being able to sustain pressure, sustain attacks, and score goals. So I think that's great. And then, lastly, one thing that I didn't do very well last season was I got in at the perfect time for Phil Foden, the second time at least, but I didn't get out in the fixtures turn. However, with the fixtures that swing an 8/9, you could just go 6, 7, 8 and then take him out for 9, right? Or you could even keep him for Villa if Villa still look poor, and then go out of him there, right? He's at a price point where you are going to have a lot of options. And by that point, I'm sure one would have presented themselves. So I think he's a very good option. And if you were to go here, I don't think anyone could blame you. Nice little differential and way to gain rank over Rangers as well. Alexander Isak, should you be buying him? Well, I don't hate it, but given I've had to say that, you probably realize that I don't love it. The first fixture is really challenging for him, and he'll probably start because Hugo Ekitike obviously did what he did last night to get sent off. So he'll probably start. And for those of you who don't know, he basically was on a yellow card, scored a goal, and took his top off, which I don't think Arne Slot was very pleased about. But yeah, of all the games to come into, that Palace one away, no, not the easiest one in the slightest, right? Arne Slot has said that following game week 8, basically, where he's already had the international break to, get more and more minutes into legs, that's when you can expect to see him firing properly. But even game week 7, maybe not so much. And whilst I think they could hurt us in game week 7, obviously they play Chelsea, still with reduced expected minutes at that price tag, I would be willing to wait, right? Another thing is, even for this game, if you fancy it, for whatever reason, they haven't started with Isak, so it may take a little time to gel. Obviously, it has done already with Wirtz, and that hasn't been completed, right? Like, he still hasn't been integrated into the side in a way that it's really worked so far. Obviously, like I said, reduce expected minutes. The only way I can see him being an option is on a wildcard if you want him as a long-term play, which I would really understand because I was looking at him on my wildcard 13. And to be honest, from 8, he looks pretty decent even with the fixtures. I wouldn't do it, but I'd get it, right? You could even, I guess you'd start him this week, right? And then accept low expected minutes in 7 and then just keep him for the long run, maybe alongside Haaland and João Pedro. and maybe this is your like way to cover Salah. Because at the end of the day, Liverpool still have the best attack in the league, at least on paper, and you'd expect at some point for it to click, and when it does, you could expect a lot of goals to be put past the opposition. So to go there early and have him as a placeholder and basically expect returns more so down the line and try and get a little bit lucky earlier, I don't mind it. I personally wouldn't, especially with Strand Larsen and João Pedro present, but I don't mind it. Erling Haaland. Should you be concerned about the potential injury? No, not really. Not in my opinion. He should be fine. I mean, the quote that's flying around on X, and I actually tweeted about it as well, so I definitely know, is taken out of context. As I read my comment section, and I was like, okay, yeah. And then I went and watched the clip, and I realized it had been taken a bit out of context. Essentially just said, a lot of the pain in the back. He's had, obviously, quite an intense schedule. He was on international duty beforehand, and he just needed a bit of rest, right? And I assume, considering he's not playing in the Cup tonight, he'll be fine for Game Week 6, especially when he's in this form. He'll be eyeing that the return to the top seat for the Ballon d'Or, right? Another thing is, I think you can read a lot into his body language and things of that sort. And when he came off in the 75th minute, he had a smile on his face, and he didn't exactly look in the most discomfort you've ever seen. So, and this is at the Emirates when they're 1-0 up, when he's already been really useful in his own box to defend, right? If he was happy enough to be taken off and not like super angry because he had been forced off with an injury, but rather he's just being managed, I think he's going to be all right. I don't think it's the end of the world. And one thing there is to consider is that if it is a little bit of a, not concern, but an annoyance to him, and City are 3-0 up, and for whatever reason, he's only scored one, and maybe Foden's got one and Rangers got one, he has got an assist. Maybe you see like an early sub again when they have Monaco away and then Brentford away after that. That is something you could consider for maybe a reason not to play the triple captain, but not so much not to bring him in, or maybe not to bring him in, but I think you can expect to start at least. And if you don't bring him in, then you'll have to watch without him, which is I did for Salah last week. And honestly, it was very exhilarating and very fun. I imagine it might have been a bit less fun if he scored more than 5 points, but you get the point. So I've just recorded this part of the video without mentioning one key detail to it right beforehand, which really needs to be expressed. There's about 4 million in the bank, roughly, give or take, and obviously everyone will have different team values when you use this draft. A lot of that money is for Strand Larsen to Gyökeres in Game Week 10 on the assumption I want to keep Haaland. Obviously, that could change if I don't. But one of the other reasons I left it in the draft is a lot of you, whether it be through a Stev or King or both, will want an upgrade there, right? For example, maybe a King to a Dewsbury Hall, maybe a King to a Caicedo, maybe a King to an Enzo Fernandez, maybe an Stev to a Van de Ven, and so on, or a Gvardiol, or Saliba as well, and so on, right? So what I thought I'd do is I'd leave the money there so you can see the generic structure, right, of the 2 points that you could upgrade, and then you can go and put the money into whichever player you want thereafter. If I was wildcarding and I wasn't going Salah, I would probably make some adjustment to King in particular, and then maybe a Stev as well. So this is my preferred wildcard draft without Salah, which we're going to start with, and I'll just run through the players. One thing I've done here is I've tried to plan a squad and put a set of players together that not only look good for 6, 7, and 8, but all the way until 13 and past that, because obviously that's where a big fixture swing is, and you want to be able to adjust for it. So I've also gone for depth so that you can stack transfers continuously, right? Nick Pope is there for that reason. I mean, they're one of the best teams on Wildcard 13, and I quite like his fixtures from, let's say, 7 to 10-ish. And in the games where they don't look so attractive, if Eddie Howe is, to example, do what he did away at Bournemouth, then he's got a decent chance of keeping a clean sheet, decent enough, and he'll always have a high ceiling for the saves that he can generate in that game. And he's 5 million, right? So you save a bit of money there. So I like it. Gabriel is really self-explanatory. I mean, it's very, very obvious why one would want a piece of the Arsenal defense, specifically him with Defcon and goal threat. And yeah, that's pretty easy there. Right, okay. Then next we have Marco Correa. And like I said, this is not a squad that's just planned for the short term, but for the long term. There is a huge upturn in the fixtures from Game Week 9. And you know what? Even Brighton at home, with the fact they haven't been playing so well, and Forest in Game Week 8, which could be okay if they're on a bit of a slide still, Forest. And then obviously the fixtures from 9. And the Cucurella's attacking potential and set piece threat. I think this could be a cool option. Now, I don't think this is essential because our defense is still not one where I completely trust us to keep clean sheets. But for the long term, he'll probably do all right. Right. He's probably not going to do too bad. There's a decent chance he does decent to good. And then maybe you're giving yourself that upside for him to do really well. So that's that. Senesi, I mean, this guy gets DEFCON basically like every game. Bournemouth are in really good form. They don't have any Europe. 1 game a week. Makes sense. He's cheap. He's very cheap, all things considering. Good fixtures, good enough fixtures. And rotates nicely with Richards, where, for example, he has better fixtures in the immediate term. Richards has it when Senesi swing back. So that rotation works nicely. Richards has obviously got DEFCON potential, and he's got a great leap on him, good timings, good header of the ball. So he's got some set piece threat as well. That defense, and with Dubravka and Steb, if you wanted to go Goodmanson, I completely understand. If I had to look at which defense is better, I think the Burnley defense is better. And I trust them more to keep it clean, hence why I've got both of them there. You know, maybe you still want to stick to like bench boost 16, which is what I was looking at. Then they would be preferable over the Leeds guys. But nonetheless, I mean, playing Gabriel every game, Cucurella most of them. Next week, you don't need to play him because Richards and Senesi have good enough fixtures. And then, yeah, this is what the team looks like. And I think it's pretty cool. And, you know, you could also have like a Mickey van der Ven in here as well, instead of maybe Richards if you wanted. So I think the defense is really solid. Then the attack is very template, right? I mean, like you've probably seen this attack a lot, aside from the fact that Strand Larsen is here instead of Gyökeres. There's a lot of money in the bank. I specifically didn't put it up because everyone's going to be like within a whole 1 million range now, right? But I think there was like 2.4 with this draft, if not more. I mean, Semenyo is one of the best assets in the game right now. Maybe on penalties, even with Cliver back. Goals, assists, DEFCON, as he showed in the last game. Expected minutes, form, fixtures, quality aside. He's got it all, right? Haaland, I'm not going to speak about, too obvious. Reinders, I'm not going to speak about, too obvious. One thing I would say is I look at him, and if you look at more the mental profile as opposed to the player, I do think in the final third he can be a little bit wasteful, and sometimes maybe lacks the, I'm going to say concentration, because that's how I observe it. But, for example, there are shots, right, where he will go for power instead of placement, and if he was maybe concentrating just a little bit more, he may not opt for that, right? That's just my personal opinion and the observation I made of him so far. And I think had he chosen a couple different options in certain moments, he'd be looking at more goals and more assists. That's just my personal opinion. I think he can be a little bit snatchy with it. But apart from that, very, very solid, and there's a lot of good things about him. João Pedro, I mean, again, from 9, great fixtures and great value. Injai, I mean, West Ham at home. After that, the fixtures aren't so great. I guess he's just at a price point that's very attractive, right? Only 6.5. DEFCON, penalties, goals, assists, expected minutes. And DEFCON in a way that most people don't have it in the defensive category, right? As a winger, he's looking at getting it very often compared to most. So there's that. And hence why he's here. But if there was to be an omission, I wouldn't mind him. Bruno is probably one of my standout picks at the moment, right? I mean, the fixtures I think are very solid for Man United. Really high ceiling, especially with how good he is on the bonus. You've got goals, you've got assists, you've got penalties. That's a recurring theme with these guys, right? They've all got the fundamentals, and he's so good on DEFCON. For someone of this attacking talent, similar to Njai, to be this good on DEFCON is a blessing. And then lastly, Strand Larsen, right? Obviously, this could be Gyökeres. But like I expressed in the Arsenal section, I do not think Arsenal's fixtures in the next 4 are better than the Wolves fixtures. And Strand Larsen is a really good striker. There was a reason Newcastle were willing to pay 50 million plus for him. And he's got penalties similar to Gyökeres. So with that being said, I personally expect him to outscore Gyökeres in the next 4. I don't think the fixtures are a bit better. I think they're a lot better. And I'm happy to go with this. And then in 10, whether it be through the sale of Erling Haaland or someone else, obviously you've got a lot of cash in the bank, then you can look to bring Strand Larsen into Gyökeres. Yeah, it's not ideal to not have, forget triple, but not even double Arsenal for West Ham at home. You could obviously tweak some things. You've got the money to get Saliba or Raya if you want for West Ham at home in GameWeek 7. But all in all, I still think this is very solid. As I mentioned in the start to the wildcard reveal, I'm going to look to upgrade maybe a Stev or a King in this side to give it a bit more depth, right? Everyone will have their different preferences for the upgrade. For me personally, I don't think it's actually necessary for me to get another attacker because I like my attack enough. But what I've done is gone for a defender I like in Dan Burn, DEFCON. I like Eddie Howe's coaching and defensive coaching. I really like his adaptability. And I like the fixtures enough whereby I'm happy enough to have an extra Dan Burn in there. So that down the line, especially 30 and beyond, he can just stay because he's just going to present such good value. That's like what I've done with my upgrade. You may do something different. You may even have more money and you'd be willing to stretch into like a Saliba or a Guardiola and then still have the money for Strand Larsen to Gyökeres in 10 on the assumption you want to keep Haaland, right? So this is what it looks like in Game Week 6. And considering it's the week you're wildcarding, you'd hope it's strong, and it is, right? It's good. Could it be better? Yeah, it could, but you're planning for the long term. Game Week 7, right? Let's go and optimize this. Again, I don't have my mouse, so you're going to have to excuse me. But this, again, is still pretty strong. I would swap this because Njai is obviously playing Palace, and I don't want to limit my upside. But that is pretty good against a Forest side that I haven't quite fired yet. And I think Ange has got a little bit unlucky. So that continues. Then, yeah. But this, so many strong fundamentals, so many good fixtures. Again, in Game Week 8, I mean, all you have to do is look at the team rating as a percentage. And it's clearly very attractive. This week, Algo would say don't play either of Newcastle, right? Because they're away to Brighton, and that makes sense. Because you have, obviously, Dubravka at home to Leeds. I personally, again, don't want to play Richards against Semenyo. I think it's quite a hard fixture as well, so would play Burn, especially with Brighton not looking super sharp. And then, yeah, here, again, strong attack. Yeah, Njai plays Everton. I mean, it plays City, not ideal, but as he did against Liverpool, especially when you don't have a defender, could be good. And look, where they have Fulham away, and I know I've been saying in the video, Palace away, so my apologies, Palace at home, Sunderland away, Burnley at home. Just so much better, right? And now you go into 9 with 3 frees. And if I were to optimize this again, you'd see, again, it's quite strong. Yeah, you've got double Newcastle defense. I guess you'd have to be okay with that. But apart from that, this team is still really strong. And then you get into 10, and then you start to consider, okay, do I want any Liverpool? If so, I can take out Erling Haaland and restructure like that. He can go, and let's just say we stick to the original plan. He can go into a Victor Gyökeres. Now you only have 0.4 in the bank. You know what? Maybe I don't want Salah, but I do want Isak, and I want someone else, for example, like a Bukayo Saka. And I'm just showing you the options available, right? This could be a very cool option available. Isak, okay, well, he's not in that category, but he is in this category. And then I have 4 million left over. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at, I don't know, not maybe Njai for this week, because he's got Sunderland away, but maybe you just bite the bullet, right? Maybe it is Njai, and you take him out for Bukayo Saka, right? Or forget that. Let's just say, because I actually do think he's going to come good, we don't go Saka, but we still want double attack for this game as opposed to defense because we think it's strong enough, and we go SA. And all of a sudden, right, this team looks really strong, and you have more depth to it, right? And that was only, what, 3 transfers? You still got 7, 8, 9. You still got 1 free transfer spare that you can carry into the week after. Cool, right? Again, you'll have 2 frees for this week. I don't know why it's sticking. Oh, I mean, like the fact that you can optimize a team. And okay, I guess it's expected when it's just lower. I was going to say, let's just say, for example, you do that. Like the point is that there's a lot of options available to yourself with the fact that the defense has so much depth and is strong enough. And you've already got good attackers in place. That down the line, again, here, this is strong. Like you'd hopefully just be looking to roll in this week quite easily, right? Because Palmer's probably not going to be there for that Chelsea good run. And then, you know, you get to 13 and you've got the transfers from 11 and 12 and 13, you've got 4. And then you look to restructure. Okay, all of a sudden, you want City and you want Liverpool and you want Newcastle and you want Brentford, right? So let's just say, as an for argument's sake, bang, 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 you 3 go, right? And I want Haaland. My God, I'm just going to keep it on all. I want Haaland back. Great, you can get him. I want Guardiola. Remember, we have 4 transfers, so we'll lose some money in a spot. So we've got Guardiola there, and then we need to go and get a mid. And for whatever reason, at this point, we're not feeling like a Bruno Fernandes, right? Well, then we can get like a Dango, just as an example. And then, you know, we were saying we were feeling a bit in Newcastle as well. Maybe at this point, just an example, he's just really good value. And we get Gordon. Okay, fine. I'm 1 million less in the bank. But you get the point that, like, I'm sure I could figure something out and go for maybe a cheaper option, either of these departments. Maybe like a Bruno Guimaraes. And then you look at the team, and when you're on wildcard 13 and you want realistically, Newcastle, City, you've got Liverpool in the form of Isak. Okay, I don't actually think you want Salah in Game Week 13 wildcard because it's really like difficult to have him and Haaland for this particular structure. You've obviously got some Brentford for Burnley at home. Still got Bournemouth for Senesi at Sunderland away, and so on, right? And then with the transfers that come, in 14 and 15, you can continue to rejig. And then in 16, you get 5. So the team's really strong for the continuation of the plan. Wildcard's pretty good in 6. And yeah, I think you're fine in 13. So I don't think it's a bad strat. I think it works with this team. So I know at the bottom of this slide, it says that the transfer plan's on the next slide. And I said I'd do that at the start of the video. But following what I just did, I thought it'd be awfully repetitive for me to do the same with a very similar team. But obviously, it's just Salah instead of Bruno, not leaving the money in the bank and downgrading Cucurella, right? And what it would turn out being, it's very repetitive, but also just at some point, game week 10, realistically, Salah or Haaland, one of them, they move out, right? And then you restructure to go into, let's just say again, Eze, Gyökeres, and whoever else. Maybe even Isak instead of Gyökeres, and you go double Arsenal defense. And then by the time you get to 13 and you've had all those roles, you look to just get into a structure with a little bit more Newcastle, a little bit more Brentford. And like I said, if you don't have Isak here and a Liverpool defender and so on. So a similar line, right? Because you're trying to get to a similar goal in 13 and even in 10, if you want to look at those two little patches. Overall, I really like it. I mean, obviously, a lot of the same players in the last draft, so no need to discuss them. With Salah himself, with the improvement in the right-hand side dynamics I saw against Everton, the improvement in his performance as well, the stylistic matchups from 7 and beyond, I can see him still doing very well. And I wouldn't be surprised if he punishes sellers, like myself. And yeah, I mean, everyone else has been discussed. Literally everyone else. There's not too much change. Obviously, Cucurella has been dropped, and there's not that money in the bank to go Strand Larson easily. It forces the sale of Salah or Haaland in 10. But considering you get them before, I don't think that's that big of a sacrifice. The only thing I really don't like is no Bruno Fernandes, who I think could be great value long term. But you're getting Salah in his place, so it's not exactly too bad. Obviously, you're also a little bit lighter. For example, in the last draft, I had Burn instead of a 7. You saw with the rotations how that was so much more helpful as the fixtures have turned. But nonetheless, for Mohamed Salah and potentially a captain opportunity here and there, I don't think you can complain if you wanted to go for this type of draft. That is all she wrote for this one, ladies and gentlemen. I certainly hope you enjoyed and found it useful. If you did, a like, a hype, a subscribe, all would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. I leave this slide up on the screen for a very particular reason, because some of you have not yet pressed the trigger. And one thing I didn't mention in that slide is don't fall into it just because everyone else is doing it. Do it because it's the right thing to do for your team. I shall see you tomorrow for team selection, which I'm looking forward to as I go into my team in a lot more depth, which I will be doing so tonight in preparation for that video. And I'm also on Green Arrow tomorrow on the Fantasy Football Hub channel, if any of you want to take a watch of that. So I shall see you very shortly. Have a terrific day, and thank you for all your support.